Well, this morning, I know it's going to come as quite the shocker for some of you, but if you've been with us for any length of time, or any time at all, or probably just met me for the first time, you've probably noticed something about my wife. Wow, see, it's that kind of day, right? Most weeks, I just was making sure you were all awake, right? Most weeks, I do not have to go looking for a sermon illustration. They usually find me. I don't know why God chooses to teach me in this way. Sometimes I wish He would just let me simply open the Bible, read a verse, write down 3 points, and call it a week. That would be great. Instead, it feels like He goes, no, I think it would be better for you to just live it first, and then you can talk about it. And this week, the Lord decided to teach me through all things from my chickens. Now, if you would have told me 10 years ago that someday I would be standing in front of a church talking about chickens, I probably would have laughed at you. I would have been like, okay, wow, that's crazy. If 10 years ago you had told me that I would own chickens, I would have been like, yeah, there's no way. I'm a city boy through and through. It's fine. I like the city. And yet, here we are. So before I go any further, how many of you have ever owned chickens? How many of you have ever had chickens? Yes, chickens? No, not yet. It can happen. It's going to happen. Come on, somebody. How many of you, though, would have absolutely no idea what to do with them once you got them? That was me. No idea. We got chickens, and I was like, what did I just get myself into? I don't know why we actually volunteered to do this. Because if you're like me, prior to owning chickens, the only interest I ever had in chickens is if they came with fries and a biscuit. Like, let's just be honest. That was my total interest in chickens. My entire knowledge of chickens were based on baked, fried, grilled. Is it in a combo? That's literally all I knew about chickens. But owning chickens from that time, about 5-6-ish years ago, I can't believe it's been that long, I have found out that owning chickens is very educational. I've discovered that chickens are fascinating little creatures, and they are also not very smart. Now, don't get offended if you do own chickens. You already know this. Chickens spend their entire day doing basically 3 things. They peck, they scratch, and every once in a while, for no apparent reason, they take off running across whatever yard they're in, just in the most awkward way possible. And if you've ever seen a chicken run, you'll notice that it is one of the funniest things. They don't run very gracefully. They just kind of waddle back and forth. They look like me running, okay? Let's be honest. Okay, they just kind of waddle back and forth, and they try to get to where they're going as fast as they can with really no direction. They look like they're late for an appointment, but have no idea where they're actually going. And somehow, this has become my life. I've caught myself saying on occasion, did we lock the chickens? Are the chickens put away? Did they all make it back into the coop? It's dark out. Hopefully they made it back in. Has anybody seen Rattle, our rooster? We call him Rattle because he's got this little Chewbacca thing at the end of his crow. He's like, right? So we call him Rattle. Who left the gate open? Who left the door open? We have these birds we call the cranky mamas. The cranky mamas, did they make it back in today? Are they good? This is who I am now, and I've accepted it. But over the past couple of weeks, something happened that made me look at these chickens just a little differently. At first, I couldn't figure it out. They would be pecking around, doing their normal little chicken business, wandering around, and all of a sudden they'd just scatter for no reason. Or they would go diving under this little covering that we have. Or someone would just stop, mid-walk. Not mid-squawk, mid-walk. And I would be like, what is going on? Why are they acting so weird? I know that they're already not unintelligent, but there's something going on here that I must be missing. What is wrong with these birds? And then one morning, very early in the morning, I looked up And sitting on this power tower that's near our coop, there was this rather large hawk sitting on the tower. Now let me tell you something about hawks. They are incredible animals. They are beautiful, they're powerful, they're very majestic, all of the wonderful adjectives. They're also completely uninterested in becoming friends with my chickens. They have no desire to be friends with my chickens. The hawk isn't admiring our landscape from his perch on the tower. He wasn't enjoying the view. He wasn't thinking, what a lovely backyard. He had one thing on his mind: breakfast. And unfortunately, our chickens were on the menu. What we eventually realized is that before we ever saw that hawk on this tower, our chickens knew something was wrong. Now, they couldn't explain it, they couldn't tell us, but they knew that there was danger overhead. And every morning after that, before we even started getting ready or before Julie had coffee, we'd be staring out the windows, not looking at the chickens, but looking at the power pole to see if that hawk was up there. Because once you know that there is a predator nearby, you stop watching the prey and you start watching the predator. So the next morning, I looked out the window, and guess who was back? The hawk. So I did what any reasonable chicken owner would do. I grabbed my hawk deterrent. Now, before any of you get concerned, it was simply just an air-powered pellet gun, not to kill him or hurt him, because that's illegal, just to scare him away a little bit, to let him know that our breakfast was no longer, our backyard was no longer serving breakfast. So I snuck out the door as quietly as possible, and I'd give him a little pop on the backside, and he'd fly away, and I was like, great, he's gone. And I'd go inside feeling very accomplished now that I've scared this hawk away, feeling good about myself, saying that'll teach him. I'm sure he's not going to come back now. And then I'd look out the window an hour later or the next morning, and there he was. And the morning after that, there he was, the same routine every day. I finally realized something, that I was treating this hawk like an interruption, just something that was an inconvenience in the morning, another thing to do, while the hawk was treating it like his mission. To me, it was just a nuisance. To him, it was survival. Because he had actually gotten a few of our chickens a few weeks ago, and we didn't know what it was. We thought it was raccoons or possums or whatever, unaware that it was a hawk. This hawk wasn't going to quit because I had made things inconvenient. He was patient. He watched, he waited. And just like that lion that we spoke about a few weeks ago, he was looking for opportunity. Have you ever noticed that the things that seem to hurt us in our life are usually more patient than we are? Temptation rarely says, you know what, make the biggest mistake of your life today. Instead, it whispers things like, just this once. Bitterness doesn't show up at once. It grows. Pride grows, resentment grows, compromise in our life grows. The enemy doesn't usually knock on your front door. He just waits for that quiet opening. And as I kept watching this hawk, I noticed something about my very unintelligent chickens. The chickens almost never looked up. Yeah, they realized that there was something going on, but they never really paid attention to it. They were completely consumed by what was happening right in front of them. If there was feed on the ground, if there was bugs to chase, if they found a worm, their whole world was wrapped around what was 6 inches in front of their beak. Meanwhile, the greatest dangers in their life were 50 feet above their heads. And I started wondering, how often am I like that? How often do I become so consumed with what's in front of me, my schedule, my bills, my problems, my plans, that I forget that there is a God that sees what I cannot see? There is always something more happening than what you and I can see. God is working in ways that sometimes we just cannot see. And the enemy is always looking for opportunities that are just out of sight. God's protection is often active in ways that you will never fully realize. So after several mornings of chasing this hawk, I finally thought, you know what? I could spend every morning going out there, trying to scare it away, waving my arms, looking like a fool, only to have him come right back. Or we could stop reacting to the presence of this hawk and start protecting our chickens. So we ordered one of those giant nets that's made to go over the top of like the chicken run. And now, whoever invented this thing has obviously never had to actually put one up. They come folded in this package that's like this big, right? And you think, oh, this isn't going to be too bad. And when you start to open it up, you suddenly realize that you have what looks like 1,500 square feet of fishing line. It's wrapped around itself, it's wrapped around your feet, it's wrapped around the fence. Somehow it's wrapped around things that's not even supposed to be close to you. Julie, being the wonderful wife that she is, thought that she would surprise me and have it put up by herself because she knew that I had a lot of things to do that day and I was going to get home late from work. And if I get any of the details wrong, just smile and nod, okay? I pulled in the driveway and I looked toward the chicken coop, and it looked like a craft store had exploded in our backyard. There was netting and string and zip ties and more string. And honestly, I couldn't tell if we were trying to protect our chickens or decorating for Halloween. Now, before anyone laughs too hard at this attempt to put this net up, I would ask you this question. How many husbands have ever come home and said, "What happened here?" While at the same time, the wife says, "Well, if you would have been home, I wouldn't have had to deal with this." Exactly. It's a two-sided event here. And so we untangled it. We stretched it out. We pulled it tight, got it over the chicken run. It was not pretty. It's still not pretty, but it works. And as I stood there looking at this net, I started imagining what the chickens would be saying, because I think like that. I don't know why. What would the chickens be saying to each other about this thing that is now above their heads? I don't know if they'd be like, well, there goes the neighborhood, or I used to be able to see so clearly, what is all of this stuff that's above my head now? It's such an inconvenience. Apparently we have very posh chickens. What is with all these strings that are now above my head? Why are they trying to make my life harder? I can no longer jump over the fence and free range around the yard because of this net that is in the way. I liked it better before. Because from the chicken's perspective, something had been taken away from them. They couldn't see the reason. They couldn't see maybe the hawk sitting right there, no more than 50 feet from them. And that's when I realized that I have done the exact same thing with God. I've had moments in my life where God has closed the door and I became frustrated. Or maybe it was a relationship that didn't work out, or a job opportunity that disappeared, or a move that fell through, a prayer that wasn't answered the way you wanted it. And your first thought is, God, why? Why are we doing this? Not because you were angry. You just couldn't understand, because all you could see was right in front of you. This net that got put in the way. Something that I've learned about God is that our perspective of His plans and His ways are often limited. We always focus on what we're losing, while God sees what He's protecting. In Proverbs 3, it says, "Trust in the Lord with all your heart, and do not lean on your own understanding." It doesn't say trust God once you understand. It says trust Him even when you don't. Because understanding all of God's plans is not the foundation of our faith. Trust in Him is. I wrote this down this week because I didn't want to forget it, and I hope that this helps you too, but sometimes what feels like restriction from my perspective is actually protection from God's perspective. because I think that so many of us think that there are things in our lives that are holding us back, that are keeping us from doing all of these things, not realizing the plan that's actually at work. When parents tell their kids, you know what, don't ride your bike in the road, it's not because they don't want them to have fun, it's because they want them to come home. When you tell your kids to hold your hand in a parking lot, it's not because you're trying to control them, it's because you're trying to protect them. Seatbelts feel restrictive until there's an accident. Helmets are not comfortable or cool looking until you fall off your bike. Life jackets seem unnecessary until you're struggling to swim in deep water. The very things that seem to limit us are often the things that preserve us. And maybe, just maybe, God's word works the same way. It made me realize that Jesus said something similar to this in John chapter 10. If you want to turn with me there this morning, you can. It says in John chapter 10, starting at verse 10, it says, "The thief comes only to steal and kill and destroy. I came that they may have life and have it abundantly." I love that Jesus doesn't pretend that the hawk isn't there. He doesn't say that you don't have to worry about danger. He acknowledges it. He said that there's a thief, there is an enemy, there is someone that wants to steal and kill and destroy, but that's not where I believe that he puts the emphasis in this scripture. The emphasis isn't so much on the thief. He is saying that I came that they may have life and have it abundantly. It's not the emphasis on the thief, but the shepherd. Because Jesus wants us to know something. The shepherd has been watching long before the sheep ever realized that there was danger. Sometimes we read this verse in John 10 and we get so focused on the first part, oh, this thief, this scary thief is coming to steal and kill and destroy, that we almost miss the rest when Jesus says that I came, I, the creator of all things, I came that you might have life and have it abundantly. A few verses later in John chapter 10, he says, I am the good shepherd. Now think about that. Jesus could have said anything. He could have chosen any title he wanted. He could have said that I am the king, and he is. He could have said I'm the creator, and he is. I'm the judge, and one day he will be. But instead he chose shepherd. Because a shepherd doesn't look at sheep the way a predator does. Now, I realized something while watching this hawk. The hawk and I were both looking at the exact same chickens. Every morning, I was looking at those chickens. Every morning, the hawk was looking at those chickens. Same flock, same yard, same morning. But we could not have had more different of intentions. The hawk looked at those chickens and was like, okay, what can I take? Who's available? When I saw my chickens, how can I protect them today? How can I feed them? How can I care for them? There's something that I almost said love. I almost said I love my chickens. That's wild. The hawk here is wanting to take life while I was doing everything I could to preserve. That is the difference, obviously, between the enemy and Jesus. The enemy looks at your life and says, what can I steal? What are you going to leave out? What opportunity are you going to give me that I can steal? Can I steal your joy, your peace, your marriage, your integrity, your relationship with God? He is always looking to take something from you. Whereas Jesus flips the script and says, how can I give? Can I give you hope today? Can I give you grace today? Can I give you peace or forgiveness or purpose? Can I just give you life? One comes to consume, the other to save. That's why Jesus said, I came that you may have life and have it abundantly. He didn't say, I came so that you could just barely survive. Not just existence, but life, real life, full life, the kind of life that only He gives. The more I looked back on this net situation, the net really wasn't the protection for my chickens. Yeah, it was something that we put in place. But the real protection for our chickens was Julie and I. The net was simply a way for us to express our care and concern for them. If I didn't care about them, we wouldn't have put the net up. I would never have spent my mornings looking and chasing some silly hawk. I would have never stood outside sweating as I untangled this giant mess of strings. Because love always acts. Love protects, love provides, love steps in. And isn't that exactly what Jesus did? Some people look at the Bible and said, man, God sure has a lot of rules. Can I challenge you this morning? What if they're not simply rules? What if they're loving instructions of a shepherd who can see farther than his sheep? What if every command, every warning, every correction isn't God trying to make your life smaller, but God trying to make your future better? Because I've learned that as I grow closer to the shepherd, I feel more safe. Not because life is easier, not because trouble disappears, but because I am close to the one who can see what I can't. Now, at this point in the story, we had got this net up, and I thought that it was over. We had won. This hawk has no chance. Like, he's up there. He's frustrated and angry because he can't get to our chickens because there's this net in the way. The chickens were safe. I didn't really see the hawk as much, I don't think, for the next couple of days. Everything seemed to be working. I felt secure knowing that the chickens were at least a little more safe. And then one morning, by sheer happenstance, Julie asked if I would go and check on the chickens one more time before I headed to work. And it's a good thing I did, because as I headed out towards the chicken coop, I could immediately tell that something was not right. As I got a little closer, I couldn't believe what I was seeing. I could see that the net was like pulled down in one spot, and something was moving. And at first I'm like, oh great, my not-so-smart chickens found another way to get themselves in a mess and probably tangled themselves up in there, and I'm going to spend the morning cutting out a chicken from the net. Because once you've owned chickens, you realize that's the safest bet, is that they've done something dumb. But as I got a little closer, I realized that doesn't look like a chicken. And then I saw it. Right in the middle of that net, the hawk was in the net. His wings were tangled. His feet were caught. He was flapping around as hard as he could. He wasn't going anywhere. And the very thing that had been put in place to protect the chickens had become the thing that stopped this predator. And I'll be honest, the first thought in my mind was not probably the most spiritual. I walked up and I said, well, you picked the wrong backyard today. And then almost immediately, standing there looking at this hawk, I realized something. The hawk didn't lose because he wasn't powerful enough. He found himself in this position because he underestimated what stood between him and what he wanted. He saw the chickens that he wanted, but he failed to see the protection that was already in place. It's so encouraging to me that God is often doing things that I can't see, and sometimes he's doing things that the enemy doesn't see either. This hawk thought he had a free meal. There was probably a chicken in the yard, and he was like, you know what? Breakfast is served, and dove straight for that chicken. As he got closer, he probably had no air brakes until he was about a foot away from the net and realized this is not going to end well. He hits that net, and all of a sudden, what was going to be this great meal has now become a trap. There have been moments in my life where I've wondered, God, where are you? Why aren't you doing something? Why does this feel like the enemy keeps circling? And maybe you've been there too. You've prayed. You've trusted. You've tried to stay faithful. But it just feels like that hawk keeps coming back. Can I remind you that just because you can't see God working doesn't mean that he isn't. Sometimes he's putting things in place that you won't even know that you need. He's protecting in ways that you'll never fully understand. And sometimes he's already prepared the answer before the attack ever comes. Now, I won't go into details of how the hawk was removed, but it was removed and my chickens are safe. And as I thought about this situation this week, I was drawn back to a place where it also seemed like the enemy had finally won. We read that Jesus had been arrested. He was beaten, he was mocked, he was nailed to a cross. And if you stood there on that Friday afternoon, you probably would have thought, it's over. It's over. We lost. The disciples probably felt like things were over because they weren't listening. Let's just be honest. They weren't listening the entire time that Jesus was telling them what was going to happen. The religious leaders of that time probably thought that they had won. They had silenced a voice that didn't align with their rituals. Hell itself must have been celebrating. Everything looked like defeat. But what looked like defeat was actually God's greatest victory. Paul says in Colossians 2, he disarmed the rulers and authorities and put them to open shame by triumphing over them in him. Think about that. The enemy thought that they had got him. They had gotten Jesus. They didn't realize that Jesus was never the one trapped. He was the one laying his life down for protection. The cross was not a loss. It was a rescue mission. The enemy walked into the very plan that would bring about his own defeat. Just like that hawk, diving in, expecting a meal, and instead finding himself defeated by something he never anticipated. And that's why we don't put our trust or our confidence in our own strengths. If it was up to me to keep every hawk away, I'd fail. Eventually, I'd oversleep. Eventually, I'd be at work. Eventually, I'd be somewhere else. I'm not enough. But Jesus never sleeps. He never gets distracted. He never misses what's happening in your life. He never wakes up late. He never says, I didn't see that coming. Nothing has ever caught God by surprise. Nothing. No diagnosis surprises him. No prodigal child surprises him. The temptations you're fighting don't surprise him. The anxiety that you carry doesn't surprise him. The shepherd has never looked at your life one time and said, wow, I didn't expect that. He's already there. He's already working. And he's already making a way. And as I stood looking at my chickens after this hawk had been removed, I couldn't help but laugh because they had absolutely no idea what had just happened. They weren't celebrating. They didn't applaud. It would have been crazy if they had. But they didn't say, wow, thank you so much for eliminating the threat. They weren't thanking me even for putting up the net. They were probably just more frustrated about the nets because we had to go back in and zip tie it back up and get it off the ground so they wouldn't get caught in it. And so they just went right back to doing what chickens do, pecking the ground, scratching the ground, completely unaware of this battle that had just been fought over them. And I wonder how many times God has fought battles for us that we knew and never knew about. How many times he protected us from something that we never saw. And I wonder how many mornings I woke up completely unaware that my shepherd was already watching over me as I slept. You know, we spend a lot of time thanking God for blessings that we can see. You know, we finally get that new job, that promotion we've been hoping for. The answered prayer finally comes, the healing, the provision, and we should absolutely be thankful and grateful in all circumstances. But I often wonder, have we thanked him for those things that we don't see? For those things that have happened that we never knew about? I have a feeling one day when we're standing in his presence, we're going to realize that his protection was far greater than we ever imagined. That's why I love that Jesus calls himself the Good Shepherd, not a king demanding subjects, not a judge waiting to punish, a shepherd. Because a shepherd doesn't stand at a distance yelling instructions. A shepherd steps between danger and the sheep. And that is exactly what Jesus did. When sin stood between us and God, he stepped in. When death had the final word, Jesus stepped in. When the enemy came to steal, kill, and destroy, Jesus stepped into our situation. The cross wasn't simply Jesus just dying for us. It was him placing himself between our enemy and the sheep. That's why I trust him. Not because I always understand him, because I'll be honest, I don't. There are still prayers that I don't understand. There are doors that I wish had opened. There are still seasons where I ask God, why? But every time that I look at the cross, I'm reminded of his heart. And once you can trust his heart, you can trust his hands, even when you don't understand what he's doing. So maybe today you've been looking at God the way those chickens could have looked at this net. You've been frustrated by his boundaries, confused by timing, disappointed by closed doors, wondering why he didn't answer the prayers the way you had hoped. Can I suggest that maybe what you've been calling restriction in your life has actually been his protection all along? Maybe that closed door that you had hoped would open was actually God's mercy saying, you don't really want this. Maybe the delay was grace. Maybe the boundary was love. Because the shepherd can see what the sheep cannot. And he has never stopped watching over us. If you would stand with me this morning, I want to leave you with one last thought. Now I know it's silly that the title of this message was about chickens. Who's watching the chickens? And at the beginning of this story, I thought I was. Every morning I was out there watching for that hawk, trying to protect them, trying to stay one step ahead. But the more I thought about that this week, the more I realized this sermon was really never about chickens. And it was really not even about the hawk. It was about a shepherd. Because if I'm honest, there are days when I'm the chicken. I'm distracted. I'm so focused on what's right in front of me. Or maybe I'm worried about today's problems, or I'm completely unaware of everything happening around me. And yet I have a shepherd that never takes his eyes off his flock. He never sleeps. He never gets distracted. He never overlooks one of his chickens. He knows each of you by name. He knows your struggles, your fears. He knows your future. And he loves you enough to stand between you and whatever seeks to destroy you. So today, if you've been running from the shepherd, come home. If you've been questioning his heart, how much he actually loves you, look at the cross. If you've been trying to carry this weight of protecting yourself, lay it down. Because the safest place that you'll ever be isn't a place where there are no hawks. The safest place you'll ever be is close to the shepherd. If today you need the peace that only the good shepherd can give, if you need to trust him again, if you've been carrying burdens you were never meant to carry, find a place today and pray. Just talk to him. I know I say it all the time, but you don't have to have the perfect words. You don't have to say the perfect things when you're praying. You don't have to say it so eloquently that to make sure that Jesus understands what you're saying. He knows your heart. He knows what you've been dealing with. He is simply looking for you to turn to Him. So this morning, we're just going to take a few minutes. And I would just ask you to open your heart to whatever He has for you today. And let's pray together. Jesus, we love you.